Since the start of the 2022 season with their brand new race cars, the 8-time winning team Mercedes has been having trouble with something called bouncing. In Baku, Mercedes was telling reporters about this bouncing problem and how it hurts the drivers. With all the constant jumping up and down, you can imagine how much pain Lewis Hamilton and George Russell felt after the long races in Azerbaijan. Mercedes had been talking a lot about their bouncing problems, but it was worse than ever in Baku. This made them ask the racing officials for help directly. Could this bouncing hurt the cars or the drivers Hamilton and Russell if it doesn't get fixed? Let's talk about it. We all know by now what this bouncing is and have seen how rough it can be on a driver's body. Even just the normal forces when turning corners puts huge stress on a driver's neck. Adding up and down bouncing on straight roads or fast corners makes this much worse and starts putting big pressure on the driver's back. These forces can cause serious long-term damage to both the cushions and bones in the spine. Mercedes has been struggling the most with this, and team boss Toto Wolff has given a serious warning about what it does to a driver's body. It's the banging on the ground. It's up to 6 times gravity that we are creating in up and down force. So it's not just muscles anymore, it's the bones? The drivers sat together and all of them but one agreed that something needs to be done. Toto also said the car was bouncing more and hitting the ground so much that it became dangerous, and he couldn't get the best performance from it. Mercedes is clearly very worried about this problem, and they know that if it continues, they will have to change their car setup to fix it. However, solving the problem by changing the driver setup will really hurt car performance, and Mercedes doesn't want to take this risk because they're afraid of falling to the back of the group. When asked about making the car higher off the ground, Toto said, "Even if we went higher, the bouncing would stay somewhere," suggesting that this is more of a basic problem than they first thought. There is some talk that this is because of the no-side panel setup that Mercedes chose for the 2022 season. No other team has this design, so could rethinking this setup get rid of their problems? Will Mercedes take the steps needed, or will the drivers just have to deal with it being super uncomfortable or even dangerous for them to drive week after week? In Baku, Lewis Hamilton was clearly the driver in the most pain as he was clearly struggling to get out of his car after the tough 90-minute race. He's even recorded as having said, "I can't explain the pain that you feel, especially on the straight parts here. At the end, you're just hoping for it to end." If this continues for Lewis, there are questions about whether he will be able to race most weekends or whether he will simply stop the car to avoid suffering through the long race times he's currently going through. As we've talked about before, the bouncing seems to be worse on street tracks like Baku because of the bumpy nature of the road, causing more pain for Lewis compared to driving on specially built racetracks. There were even some worries from Toto Wolff that Lewis Hamilton would not be able to race in Canada since this is another street track, saying that Lewis was definitely at risk of not competing in Canada. However, Hamilton has since posted on social media saying that he would be able to compete in the race, saying, "Even when it's painful, still we rise." Thanks for the love. See you all next week. The other problem with bouncing is that it increases the chances of a high-speed crash since it is much harder for the driver to see their braking point or even the driver in front of them. Lewis said after the race in Baku, "There were a lot of moments where I didn't know if I was going to make it. There was one where I didn't know if I was even going to keep it on the track." This means that Lewis was scared of even keeping the car steady and avoiding a crash. The 7-time world champion is known for fighting through anything that comes at him, but this is one of the few times in his career where he clearly doesn't feel confident in the car. The W13 that Mercedes has given him does not seem quite as good as previous cars, and he seems to lack a lot of key confidence in the car. As someone watching, you can see that the car looks like a struggle to drive because of the bouncing problem. Lewis even said that in his 15-year-long career, it was by far his hardest race. "That was the most painful race I have experienced, the toughest race I have experienced." It is very clear to see that the race in Baku was extremely hard for Lewis. And some people on social media have even been saying it was amazing that he finished the race as the 37-year-old struggled to walk after it. On the other hand, Lewis's teammate George Russell has experienced bouncing, but not as badly as Hamilton. While he's quoted as saying, "I was pretty pleased to see the race coming to a close," George seemed a lot happier with the car than Lewis was and did not seem to be in anywhere near as much pain. Toto Wolff explained this by saying, "The last 3 races, these experiments have gone wrong with Lewis, but not with George. So George may be experiencing lower levels of bouncing because he has a very different setup than Lewis. George is still very concerned, however, and knows it could be deadly if the constant bouncing continues. Only us 20 drivers would choose to have a safe ride here. When you're going at 300 kilometers an hour between walls and you can barely keep the car in a straight line, I couldn't even see the pit board. The car was moving a lot." George clearly feels that there is a big risk of a possible crash coming from the various bad effects of bouncing. This is extremely dangerous when going at the speeds of any Formula One driver, and as discussed in our earlier videos, it could be something that the racing officials need to step in to fix. Russell seems to have gotten used to the W13 car better than Lewis, with him seeming generally more comfortable, likely because of his setup. And there is no arguing that he has looked very good in the car, getting his 3rd podium finish in Baku after a string of 5th-place finishes. This is not to say that George is not experiencing some discomfort. He has been quoted as saying that the bouncing causes chest pains, and this is a serious problem which the racing officials need to address. If the 2 Mercedes drivers are both complaining of pains only a third of the way into the season, it could put a huge damper on their championship standings. The threat of either George or Lewis missing a race in the near future is very high, and Mercedes needs to either get on top of this through technical fixes or get the racing officials involved. What do you think? Should the racing officials step in to make a rule getting rid of bouncing for all teams, or should Mercedes simply buckle up and fix this problem themselves? That's for you to decide. Thank you for watching, and make sure to click on the video above for more F1 news.